Good morning. My name is Janice Leplatte,
And I'm Pavan Zaveri.
and we're here to speak to you about faculty development. But before we begin, we need to have a disclaimer. We are very new in our role in terms of faculty development. Our program was officially launched in May of 2011, and both Pavan and I have spearheaded teaching faculty what we know and what we've learned about faculty development. So we're still on the learning journey, and we're privileged to be able to share what we've learned to you this morning. So our objectives are to identify phases for simulation development and to create a roadmap for faculty development. If you are faculty, we would like you to be able to understand the phases. And if you're a program director, we hope you'll be able to create a roadmap for faculty development. Um, a little bit about simulation and the way we see it and the way the literature proposes. It's a pedagogy using one or more modalities to promote, improve, or validate a participant's progression from novice to expert. It's learner-centered approach to education. The teacher, faculty member becomes a facilitator of learning. The learner creates meaning from the experience. My colleague Pavan Zaveri will discuss the theories that supports this pedagogy.
So we're not going to go into the details of the theories here, but basically as a faculty member active in simulation, you should be familiar with a number of the theories that underlie the process that all of us are using to engage the learners in the education process. The first step that we have to keep in mind is from Malcolm Knowles, where he defined adult learning, separating it from what we've all come through the education system as an andragogy, which is focused on the art and science of helping adults learn. And as Janice just mentioned, we're aiming our events to the mature adult who is self-directed, experiential, ready to learn, but also needs to know why they're learning what they're learning. They're focused on the experiences and making sure that we're able to address and form our simulation event to address those. Other theories that also support the adult learning concepts of Knowles include Piaget's constructivism theory, where each individual is building their knowledge and form meaning based on the experiences. And again, just speaks so heavily to the experiential aspect of adult learning. And equally important is Kolb's theory, which describes 4 phases of the learning cycle and supporting experiential learning by taking learners through those 4 phases and focusing on how you can support each learner and participant in that. The next portion that we want to focus on is the phases of simulation development. And I'm going to briefly go over these main phases that we would expect that all faculty should be familiar with and should be able to execute to be able to successfully carry out simulation activities and provide simulation experience in management and program development at their local institutions. So the key phases of a clinical simulation learning experience includes, of course, identifying your target audience. 2 is defining the learning activity based on a needs assessment you've carried out of your target audience. Next is writing the learning objectives, and based on those learning objectives and the needs assessment, deciding on the level of fidelity, whether low, medium, or high, along with developing that case scenario, which is written and able to be assessed based on metrics implicit in the learning objectives, which we'll talk about shortly. So, once you've taken care of the target audience and the needs assessment, the main goal is to develop your learning objectives. Any successful learning event will not be able to achieve their target without clear learning objectives. Of course, the point of this is to guide your event development emphasizing the main points that you want to convey. And as we did at the beginning of this talk, stating what you want your participants to learn from the activity. And equally important in this is identifying how the participants' learning will be measured. Some key features include that the objectives must be written in a manner that is realistic, attainable, and measurable, which are slightly different, understandable, and relevant to practice, as we often will work with varying audiences, and you want to make sure that you're able to address these to the level of the audience that you're working with, and written in appropriate behavioral terms. To speak about those behavioral terms, I'd like to share this taxonomy, and I'm sure it's not very easy for most of you to see it, but what I'd like to overall provide in this is that there is a progression of learning objectives from the very basic of identify and list to the much more complicated synthesis and evaluation that you can see on the right side of the staircase, where often it's in the analysis, synthesis, and evaluation phases that simulation and the cases that we do will come into play. On the bottom half, you can see various verbs to be used to have an active involvement of the learners, also in general being targeted to be able to measure them. This taxonomy is taken from Bloom, and the reference is there at the bottom. And it's been adapted to be more appropriate to the type of learning that we do. So, based on that, we want to share with you just some sample objectives to get everybody on the same page of what we're looking for in terms of being able to create learning objectives that all faculty should be able to in carrying out simulation programs. Some will be at the simple level of identify, yet what we're identifying is quite complicated, such as latent threats in a quality improvement program. Another can be demonstrating patient teaching with standardized patients, a significant part of the simulation spectrum that we see. Applying critical concepts, formulating a management plan, or evaluating self and others on teamwork and leadership. All of these aspects can definitely be measured with various metrics, but also can provide a very clear understanding of what the learner is expecting to get out of it, as well as what the educator is hoping to convey. The next aspect that we talked about is developing the case scenario. There's a variety of elements in here that need to be included in any case scenario, starting with the history, a bit of equipment, the learning objectives we just spoke about, what you expect the knowledge base to be of the participants before they come, and then being very clear about what the role of the participants will be, as well as the role of the educator and facilitator. Finally, some sources of evidence or reference to the teaching that you're going to be providing through this format, as well as, most importantly, some guidelines for debriefing, as each of us come with our own frame of how to debrief and what is involved in a successful debrief. Now I'd like to just share some elements. There are a number of there's a number of templates available. And I just wanted to share a few of the elements that are out of our template. So, for example, we're going to start out with a brief. In any kind of template, there should be a brief summary for the simulation center technician or staff that's going to be carrying it out, describing basically what's going to happen through this scenario. So, for example, here, this is a 6-year-old pet struck, confused at the scene. But keeping in mind is that it first talks about the beginning part. You can see here just talks about the presentation, but in that summary you're going to talk about the conclusion as well, so that the simulation center tech knows what the expected outcome will be. Another important part will be the outline of the scenario progression, where you're going to basically provide in a systematic format what the different states will be in terms of timing, the mannequin, what the participants will do, and maybe what the facilitator will be doing. And oftentimes you'll have 3 or 4 elements from an initial state, a progression, and a decompensation or resolution. And those can be the scenario progression portions. Equally important in all of this will be your learning objectives and making sure that your scenario as well as your progression all is able to speak to the learning objectives. Finally, what's equally important and probably the most important part of the event itself is the debriefing. As others have taught me, basically all of that preparation work is fodder for that debriefing. However, what's important in that debriefing? What are we trying to accomplish in that debriefing? Clearly, it's the most important portion, and it's going to be an immediate, to be able to get those immediate responses and that immediate emotion as well as understanding to lead to a point of reflection. But this is not just any kind of reflection. This should be a guided reflection where we're able to, as a facilitator, as faculty members, to lead the discussion, to facilitate it such that everyone is able to achieve, to get an understanding and a grasp of what has been covered. Finally, you want to be able to link what you've covered, what's been covered in the debriefing, back to the learning objectives, such that you're able to close the loop and people are able to take something away from what has been discussed. Finally, after the event is closing, you definitely want to make sure that you have some sort of evaluation tool in place, whether it is covering about change in practice with the Likert scale, whether it is about clinical confidence, as you can see here, and in assessment, or a more broader feedback tool of an open-ended, of a brief answer, short free text question, like describing something that they learned, and then of course also the free text that many of us enjoy in terms of what did you like most, what could be changed in the plus delta model. Now I'd like Janice to talk a few minutes about peer review before we move on to the faculty roadmap, the roadmap for faculty development.
At our organization, we use a further element in terms of in teaching, which is peer review. We use peer review observers in nursing education with large groups. The observers are provided with a checklist, each to observe a specific role: primary nurse, charge nurse, respiratory therapist, so that they're really focusing on the role of each one of these people and could report on it. The data often provides a foundation for debriefing. And very often you ask these peer reviewers first, before you start debriefing, what did you observe? Once we have gotten the emotions out of the way, what did you observe in terms of what was going on? And recently I found an article that directly supports the observer role using Bandura's social theory to support the process. So there is a role for the observer in the actually simulation activity.
I'd like to, we're very flexible in our talk, and we appreciate the questions in the chat box, but I'm happy to go ahead and answer them right now. Mark asks here, can you differentiate learning from systems objectives? For example, we had one example of identifying a latent safety threat as a learning objective. And so there clearly can be systems objectives in terms of what your program is trying to achieve or what you're trying to achieve for the system that you're working in, whether it's the emergency department or the ICU. But at the same time, that can also, at the same time, that can also be a learning objective for an individual in being able to identify latent safety threats. I want the participants in this, they may be administrators and managers, to be able to identify latent safety threats, and maybe they will be in the role of the observers to be able to identify those, or in a variety of ways. And so again, through the debriefing, it's important to identify, is your learning objective about the system, about the participants, and who's going to be able to accomplish which aspect?
Okay, I'm going to continue and speak to you about the roadmap that administrators may require to be able to develop a program within your own organization. And really, really most important, critical, is the needs assessment. Who's my audience? What do they need and how will they like it delivered? And I tell you, this was one of the things I didn't do so good when I was trying to begin simulation activities at Children's National. Their needs assessment really need to be absolutely succinct. Program-wide training, you need to be encouraged, and which is great for networking, and through networking you really learn. The maintenance, the continued dialogue, and the support, that's really required. So your needs assessment, really, like Pavan talked about before, adult learning principles. Help faculty really understand the value of simulation as a methodology for active learning, critical to the adult learner. And you really have to be specific in that needs assessment to really gain from the faculty how much do they know about the learner. And these may be faculty who are really, really good with the PowerPoint presentation. But moving into this simulation activity, they really need to be more attuned to the active learning environment. The theories that support simulation, theories place meaning on the activity and helps the faculty begin to internalize their role. Once they understand what it means by constructivist theory or Cole's theory, they begin to internalize where they are and what they need to be doing. The learning objectives, and Pavan spoke at length about learning objectives. I know for a fact that it takes a while for someone to be able to really develop learning objectives that are measurable, that are realistic. So that will take some practice, and we do a lot of that here at Children's, helping our colleagues really practice the development of learning objectives. The case scenario development, make it a team approach, right? Each include content expert, the simulation technician who will be helping you to run the event, everyone who's really going to be a participant within within the learning the learning group. Someone at maybe it's at the unit-based level who can give you an idea of what it really feels like in the real world. The role of the facilitator, extremely challenging. So the challenge will be to really find out, have you done any simulation in the past? And what did it feel like? Because now you're asking them to go from educator, so from telling to listening. And sometimes that could be very, very challenging. And I found it was the most difficult for most of the educators that I work with. They couldn't see themselves in the role of the facilitator. So again, that may be some piece of it that you just have to do on its own, how to facilitate. And the elements of debriefing is not a lecture. Time to help participants extract meaning from the activity. So again, very often debriefing, we had a facilitator workshop for 4 days. And we learned many things about simulation during that time. But we had to bring someone back about 2 or 3 weeks ago to really have a 4-hour workshop on debriefing. So that's something you may want to pull out as extremely essential to the simulation event. Some of the program-wide training, we got some training from the Boston Children's Hospital. There's also University of Rochester has a Center for Experiential Learning. Brown University, they're developing their clinical simulation center, and it's going to be, offer some teaching. The Society for Simulation and Healthcare offers the certification in simulation, and the preparation guide, really provide faculty with the essential topics that they really need to know to have a successful simulation. Some of the others that I want to talk about, as you know, I'm a member of the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning, and we developed a standards of best practice in simulation. which was recently revised. And that itself gives you eight sections in terms of developing a whole simulation. Um, the Simulation Innovation and Research Centers was sponsored by the LNN. And what I like about that, I first used that here at Children's to introduce people to the simulation environment. It's a good outline. It has essential initial learning modules, and it's really great for the beginners to the competent, because I mean you learn, they read there are some references there, and while the folks are from academia, they speak to a wide variety of simulation experiences. And then you could begin to customize your own, which we did. We had faculty training from our Boston colleagues. We had the workshop, but we also had Simulation 101, Lunch and Learn, where we focused on specific pieces of it. We did how to develop objectives, and that's all we did. We did how to develop the case scenario, and that's all we did. You know, so you can really develop your own homegrown based on the needs of the faculty in your environment. The maintenance piece, you must have meetings. Faculty need to come together so that they can help each other. And very often we may develop, say, a case scenario as it relates to sepsis, and maybe you want the acute care side of sepsis, and then you want the critical care piece of sepsis, or you want the piece of sepsis that belongs in the ED. So coming together as a group really help us to really develop some really robust case scenarios that we can use in each area. Our leadership meetings are always things that you need to decide on, which mannequins you need to buy, where's the depreciation on some of what you already have, what else do we need to get, videotaping, what it is we need to do. So at least once a month the leadership meets to be able to spend the money appropriately. What's our staffing going to look like? Annual retreat aligned program goes to very often we have to meet, and at the end of this month, Pavan and myself and another educator, we're going to meet and look at our programs that we have, and sort of how do we need to improve on them, what's really happening, how do we need to help our faculty to really hone in on our organizational goals to match the simulation that we're doing. And continuing education and simulation, it's really an individual person. You're passionate about it. You need to read up some more and share articles. I do a lot of that, a lot of research on new elements of simulation, and share articles with my friends so that we're all on the same page. So very often, even and as I'm thinking through this, even developing a journal club within your own organization as it relates to simulation will help the growth of the environment itself. So now Pavan's going to talk to you what exactly we learned as we were going along.
So obviously this path here that Janice briefly mentioned at the beginning, we developed our simulation program here at Children's in 2008, and it wasn't until 2011 that we really were able to engage many more faculty, meaning nurses and physicians and associated healthcare providers, to really take this off with a significant structure. And I'd just like to now share some of the lessons that we've learned over that time. First and foremost, as much as we all try to train together and try to have the group reach a level, one-on-one development remains critical. And that means not only individually taking the charge to develop ourselves, but also the core faculty at a simulation program reaching out to each of the subject matter experts, as well as the other faculty and leadership of the simulation program to maintain their development using the things that Janice just spoke about in terms of certification, continuing education, journal club, and the such. And this whole process requires a constant, ongoing investment from the division, from the program, and eventually from the sponsoring institution, whether it's a medical school, a nursing school, or a hospital-based, or other private organization. Without that constant investment, there's going to be a lot of roadblocks, because a lot of people can start out strong with we buy 5 mannequins and we're ready to go. But without that investment in the individuals running the events, running the courses, it's going to fall flat after maybe a year or two, or even sooner. And that's why that constant investment is critical to the success of your simulation program. And keep in mind that, as the next 2 points allude to, simulation is not natural to every teacher, as Janice was mentioning. Your needs assessment really of the faculty who are going to be carrying out the simulation is what's really going to be critical to know where people are at and where they're coming from. There are often teachers that are touted in their own divisions as, oh, they're just a great teacher and they really know how to connect with the student, and they are able to share so much great information. It doesn't necessarily equate them to a good simulation educator. Simulation, as we all know, has its unique challenges, limitations, but also benefits, and provides a very different environment where we are not on the soapbox standing there sharing everything that we know to be able to make them learn what we want them to learn. Simulation is largely about the debriefing and thereby the facilitator role. And that is a challenge for many good teachers. And that's again where your needs assessment to know where your existing faculty who are doing simulation are at and your new faculty who want to come into simulation are at. And this needs assessment, it can be written down, it could be a survey they have to fill out, but it can also be just a heart-to-heart conversation about where they're at, what they envision as the role of simulation, and a reality check of what simulation actually has to offer. Keep in mind, as many simulation programs are growing and developing across the country and the world, every field has early adopters, and it's so important to capitalize on them. Everyone's going to have their different strengths, but probably the one most important strength people have to offer is their interest and their willingness to participate. It is so critical for programs that have several people involved in running their activities, is able to capitalize on those people, on those individuals, and bring them into the fold, so to speak, have them drink the Kool-Aid, as we say here, that simulate of the benefits of simulation, of the utility of simulation, and then also to develop them into simulation educators, simulation faculty, who can develop and carry out and execute the programs that are needed and available to the audience that they're able to target. So, in conclusion, what we'd like to share with everybody is that planning your scenarios systematically with and for your learners is going to be able to provide the best simulation programs that you can, not only at the event level, but at a systematic program level. And the with and for relates to the vital importance of the needs assessment at every step of the way, whether you're starting out with the needs assessment for the learning events as you slowly develop your program and your events, and then moving on to the needs assessment of your faculty, who then become the learners of how to execute simulation most effectively and how to incorporate simulation into the teaching and educational program that your schools and hospitals are carrying out. Finally, how critical it is to create that roadmap to develop your faculty, from the needs assessment that I just spoke about to the training to get everybody up at a given level. And then equally important is that maintenance of certification, so to speak, maintenance of education, maintaining the active involvement of all your faculty in simulation efforts locally, regionally, and internationally through organizations such as IPSS and IMSH, and other organizations across the world, so that we're all able to share and develop and grow our programs effectively. So these are some of the references that we have, and I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments or your willingness to share your experiences. This was based on, obviously, as you can see, some references, but also a lot of just our experiences, and I know that everybody's got a wide variety of experiences across the listening audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Janice and Pavan. I think that was a great presentation. I just had one question specifically regarding the format of the courses. Janice, you mentioned the CERC courses. I looked on the website. It looks like those are available as online modules, but it sounds like you guys do a lot of class-based sort of in-person training as well. Can you just give us an insight into those two different formats and your feelings regarding those two?
The CERC ones are a good introduction to get people really understanding some about simulation. And then they will have questions, because our people here did it and then they had questions. Specifically about how to develop the case scenarios, because that was a little bit difficult for them to really know how to begin, what framework, what to use. So it was a good introduction. And then the homegrown, like Pavan said, it kind of got us together, that we were learning together and answering questions. So, the homegrown, I think it's really great for the networking that needs to occur. And then with that, we would bring in what we've learned. Pavan has some information from being in the INSPIRE group, and I do have information too and being on SSIH. And I do have information from being in the INAXO group. So, the networking that occurs there allowed us to really bring some of our own information into being able to develop our program. And we did a lunch and learn, and we did it twice, and we offered contact hours, so it was an incentive for people. So, that's how you blend both, I think.
And I think that it's really important to keep in mind that as you're assessing your learners being the faculty, what they're going to be willing to do, what they're willing to go through, and how you're going to engage them best. So when we started here, we kind of had reached our critical mass in 2011 that we're able to arrange an on-ground, an in-person workshop for 3 days and be able to get a good number of people that want to be involved in this, 15, 20 people, to validate the expense and the logistics related to bringing a workshop to your center. At the same time, there are people that join in later into the effort. That was now 2 years ago. Now we have newer learners that want to be a part of this. How do we engage them? And so I think a combination of in-person workshops as well as online workshops can really be potentially combine to create an even stronger experience for the faculty to be able to get them up to speed. And the other challenge being that at every center, everyone has access to different amounts of resources, whether you're the sole person or 3 of you doing simulation at your program, and you really want to do it, but you're not quite sure how. Sometimes when they're going to one of the workshops that these different universities provide or hospitals provide, or enrolling in these online courses, a combination may be what's out there for you.
Will that answer your question?
That does. Thank you very much. Anyone else with any questions? You can type them in the bottom box there.